Welcome to Big Blend Radio with your hosts, Lisa and Nancy, editors of BigBlendMagazine.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to Big Blend Radio's Way Back When History Show. Today we welcome back Glynn Burrows. You know him, he's a family history expert and tour guide and owner of Norfolk Tours in England. And if you are digging up your family, I was going to say your family's dirt, call Glynn. It's ancestral dirt. No, but Glynn really does take people all around England to research their family history, and often to the sites where their families have, been, whether they've been born in a certain church, maybe fought in World War II, all kinds of unique places. So I encourage you to go to his website, norfolk-tours.co.uk. Now, today he's joining us to talk about historic ships of England, two specific ones, the Mary Rose and the Victory, the HMS Victory. His article is up in the history section of blendradioandtv.com and will be featured in our upcoming issue of Way Back When History Magazine. So welcome back, Glynn. How are you?
Hello. Yeah, I'm good. Thanks. Had a busy few days, but all back to normal now.
Oh, cool. Busy, but it's been
Busy's
really more
good.
family history tours lately,
Oh,
right?
yeah. I've had two lovely couples over from America, and we've been doing some real tours all over the country. So it's been great fun.
So go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think one day, Glynn, you're going to end up taking somebody on a tour that turns out to be related to you.
I've already done that.
Oh, well, you have?
Yeah,
Wow.
I had a lady contact me a few years ago now, and I traced her family back a bit further than she had, and we sat in a church in the middle of Norfolk, and the man was born in 1774, I believe, and his elder sister was born just before him. So I said, this is where Sarah, I think her name was, Sarah was born here in such a year, and Edmund was born here in 1774. I said, and you know all about Sarah's family. I said, well, Edmund had a daughter called Lydia. Lydia had a son called Edmund, and Edmund had a son called Edmund, and then Edmund had a son called Bertie, and Bertie had a daughter called Audrey. Audrey had a son called Glynn, and he had a son called Edmund. So
Wow.
we were actually literally cousins. We were blood
Wow.
relatives, and that was an amazing moment.
That's wild.
Yeah,
This is what's so
Wow.
interesting about this,
Cool.
The family history is you
Yeah.
bump into these, small world,
Well, there was
situations.
another one.
It's awesome.
There was yet another one. One of the couples I've just had over in July. This lady's family was in my local town. And when I dug a little bit further back on her family history, it turned that one of the couples actually came from the village that I came from. Wow. And when I dug a little bit further, I found that in 1778, they were actually living next door to my ancestors. So our ancestors used to live next door to each other. And there she is living in...
That's weird, Glynn. That's
living
weird.
in Kentucky. And there's
awesome.
me living in Norfolk. And our blood ancestors live next door to each other. And there we stood.
That's weird.
We stood on the village green looking at the cottages because they still exist.
Wow.
And that cottage was where I was taken into when I was a baby, because that's where my parents lived until I was 1. And that cottage was next door to the cottage where her ancestors lived.
It's weird. I mean, it's good weird, but
That's
I mean, that was meant to be, you know what I mean? That's
So
6
cool.
degrees of separations, whatever they say that it's more like closeness, when you have those kind of moments. Well, speaking of family history, when we were talking about ships last month, we were talking about the Royal Tour of England.
Yeah.
And everyone, that story is up on nationalparktraveling.com, all the royal sites. And we started talking about ships and also because obviously the royalty is very involved with what, the ships going out to conquer the world. And at the same time, you were talking about in your article that's up now about the Mary Rose and the Victory, about what the conditions were like. And so it does tie back to family history, I think, especially for Americans over here. Well, now, if your family was Black slavery, those conditions were really bad. And those were like just, it's amazing to think that you'd even want to survive after going through all of that, and
I mean, when you see some of the pictures that showed what the slave ships were like, it's just unbelievable, because they basically gave each person enough room to barely lay down, and that was it.
Wow.
So although there was obviously cramped conditions on ships for everybody who traveled across the Atlantic, if you were in a slave ship, you just didn't have any room. It was just too much. But and that's without, all you got to think about is just the room. Okay, so you might have to sit up, but you've also got to take into consideration the lack of air, the lack of food and water, and the smell and the heat.
And
we're back to the
rats.
potty
And
thing again.
rats. There were rats on the ship.
Well, yeah, there wouldn't be any room for the rats. The rats would be the least of your problems.
Wow.
Living down for anybody who went across the Atlantic, even before, shall we say, before 1850, anyone who went across the Atlantic before 1850 did not have a comfortable journey. And the people who went over in the 1600s, you imagine going over the Atlantic, and it would be a little tiny boat be going like that. It would not have been nice.
They were pretty brave, really, when you think about it.
Yeah, but I mean, just think about it. They would be pretty brave if they knew where they were going and what they were going to and how long it was going to take them. Can you imagine going over there, not knowing really what it was going to be like, and you didn't really know how long it was going to take you? And bravery really didn't come into it. Stupidity done, but
naivety.
Or just adventuresome spirit.
I think
but you're going for a reason,
exactly.
I think soldiers.
I think the main thing is that these people were escaping, and that is that also ties up with today, where we have lots of immigration due to people escaping from what they're escaping from. And it was the same sort of thing. People were escaping from either religious persecution or for any other reasons, and they thought that the better option was to get in a little tiny wooden boat and sail across the Atlantic to get away from what they were experiencing. Well, that's the same thing as what we're experiencing today, where people think that it's a good idea to get in the back of a lorry and travel across the English Channel to escape from what they're escaping from. It's exactly the same thing.
We just had a truck with about 30, 40, I think, immigrants in it, and they all died from heat exhaustion because it's like, really, this day
the people that bring them over, it's actually human trafficking that's going on as well. And there's sex trafficking. The whole thing, it gets crazy. And when you look at climate change right now, people are leaving. We did an interview with a lady, Deanne Birch, and she lived up in the Arctic Circle with her husband back in the 70s, I think 60s or 70s. And we're talking about this island that she was on, this tiny Aleutian island. I'm going to get it all wrong where she was. But anyway, her book is called Fire and Ice, and it's a memoir about her adventures. And it was not living like normal living of what we know today, because they were up in the boonies and you're surrounded by ice and you're living on seal suddenly. Everything you know is out the window. And they had fires in their igloo. They didn't live in an igloo, but others did. No, others did. So I said to her, well, that part of Alaska, way up there at the top, you got to think about what's happening with climate change. Are people worried up there? And she said, her village that she was on was the first village that had to leave because of climate change.
Mm.
And they had to move the town all the way onto the mainland
Wow.
because of the water coming up. Now you got to think about that with all the little islands around the world, what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a scary thing. I mean, even think you guys are on an island, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, you might be
Mhm.
floating over and saying hi to France a little closer. You know, who needs the English Channel? Maybe that's what's going to happen. We're all going to reconnect. Though all the land is going to reconnect at some place. But
Yeah, and then
but
100 million years later, it'll all break up again.
but you've got to, and this is happening now. So and people have always been nomadic in a way, in search of a better quality of life, no matter what it
Exactly.
is.
Mhm.
And the
Mhm.
ships, I mean, part of that is exploring to find out what are the new places out there. And England has got to be, and what is the HS, by the way, for the Victory? That's more of a warship, wasn't it?
HMS, it's Her Majesty or His
Her
Majesty's ship.
Majesty. Okay, HMS, yeah. So the Victory was a warship that went out,
Yes.
really.
Yes.
Wow.
I mean, the most of the ships that you find that are preserved were actually warships, because most of the other ships were broken up and, reused or what have you. I mean, the Mayflower doesn't exist as such. It was refitted and then broken up and whatever. So I mean, they don't really know what the Mayflower was actually like, because there isn't a plan of it. There isn't a drawing, a detailed
Wow.
drawing of it. So nobody really knows the detail of the Mayflower. I know they've rebuilt it. They've got a replica of it, what they thought it was like, but they don't really know what it was like, because ships from that date don't exist.
Mm,
Apart from the ones that are sunk, like the Mary Rose, if
Yeah.
you're able to find another ship from, we'll say 1620, that's sunk, you might be able to find one, but it's unlikely that it's going to be preserved, because not many
Yeah.
of them were actually preserved. And the only
Mm.
reason the Mary Rose was preserved was because it ended up in silt. So
Mhm.
half of it survives, because it
That's
ended
amazing.
up, it ended up in silt. So it was sealed in a little cocoon,
Mm.
and the wood and everything else on board really didn't rot, because it was, what do they call it? It was no oxygen, no
Yeah.
anything getting to it.
Mhm.
Anaerobic,
Yes.
I don't know what it is.
Yeah,
So it
it
doesn't
was
rot.
it was pickled under the
Yeah.
water. It
Yeah.
was pickled.
Petrified. It's not really petrified.
No,
but
no. It was the
it's-
fact that there was
Yeah.
nothing getting to it. It was completely sealed.
Yeah.
And the only damage that was done to the ship was basically by the water and the waves and things that ruined the rest of the ship that was still sticking out of the mud.
Wow.
It's
And you said in
amazing.
your article that you were watching it on TV, them
Yes.
hoisting it up, and then it fell.
Wow.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
it sort of, they were lifting it up like this in a big cradle, and then suddenly it went like that. And because something had snapped. There's a video of it online. If you look up the raising of the Mary Rose, there is a
Okay.
video of them actually raising it, and it suddenly went like that, and because
Oh,
something
man.
snapped. But
And so you're watching this, all of England's tuned in to watch this. And if you could hear
yeah.
everybody at home go
They both
at once.
at the same
Yeah.
time.
I think that was about 1982. I think they raised the
Oh,
Mary
wow.
Rose, so it's a long while ago. But I
And she was
remember
a warship as well.
she was a warship. She was Henry VIII's sort of biggest warship at the time. So he knew all about that place, that ship, because I mean that was a really important ship for him. But it went down, killing most of the crew, and so many of the artifacts were on board, and that's still there, because they aren't there now. They're in the museum, but they were still there because it all went down really quickly. And although they did manage to get some of the stuff out, obviously during the 1540s, what you could do was you could go down in I suppose you could, I don't know whether they had diving bells or whether they just held their breath, dived down, tied a rope around a cannon, and then hoisted it up again. But they did used to go down and rescue things off wrecks like cannon because obviously they were very expensive, but they weren't interested in tool chests and, bottles of beer,
Yeah, well.
So that's all still there.
But it's cool
Everything
that
is
you could see
amazing.
that, and the Victory, you could see that, so this was all in one place that you can go to see both ships,
Yeah,
which is pretty
literally,
cool.
they are literally beside each other, and that is the naval dockyard in Portsmouth, and it's got the Mary Rose and the Victory, plus a Victorian another naval ship called the Warrior, which is another great ship. It was steam, but they still had sail, so it was the transition between sail and steam. And again, that's another fantastic ship to look through. I mean, when I went down to the bottom of the ship where the engine rooms are,
Oh, wow.
there were banks of great big furnaces.
Wow.
And you could only imagine what it was like to be down there shoveling coal on these furnaces. It must have been totally unbearable down there, because not only are you in a furnace, basically, but you're completely in that part of the ship, So
That's amazing.
it must have been horrendous to be down there.
And to me, when I was reading the number of people on these ships, I'm like, no way, I'm not getting on there. That's too many people. Really?
Okay, and talking about the bathroom habits, because we have to continue our conversation from the
we
toilet.
love it.
We love the toilet. Listen, there's nothing like potty talk and toilet humor. And if you go to nationalparktraveling.com and just type in the search Royal Tour, you'll see the Royal Tour of a royal toilet that Glynn put in there. And then, of course, in this article, you had to go in and find the toilet. But like how many, when you think how many people, so like the Mary Rose and the Victory, like how many people are actually on this ship at one time? And do they only have one toilet? And does that go out to sea? The shark is swimming next to it, and all of a sudden, oh, hello, here you go. A deposit is made to the ocean. What's going on?
There were toilets on the decks, between the decks. The toilet that's in the picture that I sent for the article is actually Lord Nelson's toilet in his own quarters. So I was quite chuffed to think that I could see the toilet where Lord Nelson sat his little bottom when he was out at sea. But, there were toilets for the sailors. But come on, they're all men together. They're
peeing off the side of the deck, exactly.
There's the side of the ship,
Yeah.
And if you had to go, there's always a bucket, so that they wouldn't have worried about toilets for the most of the sailors. If you got 800 sailors on a ship,
oh boy,
they're going to be going over the side, aren't they?
That's a lot of buckets.
It all has to do with which way the wind is blowing.
Exactly. I think we all know that.
If you get to the top of the mast, you're winning.
I really can't imagine a woman traveling back then on ships like this. I really,
with those dresses, can you imagine with those dresses?
Yeah, and the corsets and all the bustles and all the.
Don't forget that all these bustles and corsets, they're only really from the 1800s. The earlier women had much more comfortable clothes.
Well,
and also don't forget, we're getting to toilet humor and underwear again, but ladies.
Speaking of that, we did watch Mrs. Brown.
Yes, we did.
Ladies' underwear. The sort of the slang word for underwear in England is, or used to be, drawers.
Right. Yeah.
Because they actually used to be two separate legs that were drawn together by a piece of string around your waist.
Like bloomers.
No, not like bloomers.
Not bloomers.
They were two separate legs.
One leg and one leg.
Yes, and they were tied around the waist. So there weren't really a problem for ladies because they didn't have to.
Oh, so you had an open portion.
Yes, an open portion. Yes, you had an open portion. So bloomers and knickers are really a modern a very
Yeah,
modern.
Well, did
they're
women have
clothes.
panties though? Now I'm like
No.
really
Oh,
fascinated.
boy.
No,
No panties.
Oh,
no,
Knickers, no
Just-
knickers.
no.
So it's like wearing a kilt almost,
it's
just like
like,
with,
no, it's like wearing chaps like cowboys.
yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Exactly. That is more or less what they were. They were drawn
So
together.
what's the
around the waist.
point after all to wear those? I mean, you have something over it, right?
Well, you're wearing a dress,
Well,
aren't you?
yeah, you put
Yeah,
a
so
dress
then
over it.
what's the point of having the bloomers under the dress if, you're not having knickers?
Well, I think the whole point about wearing drawers was that you had something on your legs, you know.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, well, yeah, because you're cold. I'm thinking it's summer
Well,
out
and then-
here and I'm feeling well,
But-
you guys had summer big time in England this year.
Yeah. But
A
you
little
know,
warm.
that's what it was.
you
But
know.
you didn't normally have women on ships, apart from when they went to America.
Mhm.
Obviously,
Mm,
then
yeah.
they had to just muck in, literally.
Yeah.
I mean, women in the 1700s and the 1600s, they were wearing reasonably comfortable clothes. They weren't wearing tight fitting corsets and things like that. It's a very sort of Georgian and Victorian thing when they started wearing these. Well, for normal people, for run of the mill.
And we were little compared to what we are now. I mean, when you go in the museums and you see the clothing and the shoes are teeny. Well, I mean, over here in the
Yeah.
States, Glenn, we got big over here. I mean, England is a little bit smaller, like, people wise.
Because they're
When
on
you
the
get over
island.
here, we're like Amazon people here,
I
like
think
really,
you-
like we're
you-
massive. Oh, I
No,
bet
you-
we're not allowed to say that
no,
anymore either.
You grow to fit the
Oopsie.
country.
Sorry, I did not
so-
mean to be
yeah,
rude to the
Lisa,
Amazon people.
You grow to fit the space available. So if you're in the United States, you get bigger feet. If you're
Is
in
that
England
right?
on an island, you stay a little
We've
more
only got little
compact.
feet. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't
tell-
know.
I'll
I
tell
just
that-
wouldn't. I'm
I'll tell that
always
to my mate.
fascinated. Whenever I see when I see the clothes and the historic displays
Yeah.
of women's clothing and men's,
There's no
'cause
way.
men- I mean, it's kind of weird because men were almost wearing women's clothes at one point.
Yeah.
It's like, and now you look. I mean, our feet were so much smaller. Our waists
Yeah.
were smaller, and it has to do with our diet too, and what we have more of an abundance now than what we had. You couldn't have meat every single day. Now we
Yeah.
have meat. So we've expanded.
It's also exercise. I mean, one of the
That's true.
One of the
That's true.
skeletons on board the Mary Rose is really fascinating because by doing the deep investigations into the skeletons, they were able to ascertain that one of the men who they found was an archer. The reason they found bow and arrow, if you don't know what an archer.
Mhm.
The reason they found that was because to be an archer, one arm has to be a lot stronger than the other bit.
Mhm.
And your bones will show that. If that's what you do all your life, your
Oh,
bones
wow.
will show that. And this man's shoulder was so much more developed on one side than it was the other. And they were able to ascertain that that was because the connective tissues to his muscles onto his shoulder had to be so much stronger on one side than it was the other, that over the years he developed a much stronger right
Wow.
shoulder blade. And they were able to actually show that by the investigations into his skeleton. So he was an archer.
Wow.
So, it does prove that these people were number one fitness. They were the top of their game because they had to be. They didn't have to go to the gym.
I know, it's just thinking,
what they did.
like, people buying exercise machines, to someone back then, they would have thought that was absolutely crazy.
Well, it is because
Yeah.
my son-in-law is a farmer. He doesn't need to go to the gym, because he.
How many of us buy them and then they become clothes racks in your
Yeah,
bedroom?
Exactly. But people who still do manual labor do not need to go to the gym. It's only
Right.
people, because we are so used to sitting on our backsides and talking to one of these things, or
Mhm.
just tapping away on the
TV,
computer and
television.
we're not actually doing anything. That's why
Mhm.
there's so many problems today. I'm speaking from somebody who is overweight himself, so I'm not preaching to anybody.
Yeah, but that's not from you just sitting. Those are the cheese scones.
So
Yeah,
the
all right,
most,
all right.
So you're
Yeah.
not
Here's-
overweight. You're not.
no, I think that the most developed muscle is going to be lifting a drink of some sort.
I think
So-
probably.
And eating.
See,
So,
it's
but
forks,
I think one
spoons.
thing that we've all see, this is one of the reasons why this article to me sort of brought home so many different things, because I haven't had a lot to do with ships until I was lucky enough to go down there this last couple of weeks. And it's by visiting things like this that I then get the idea of what it was like for them. To be able to walk around the Victory, even me, I'm only short. I had to sit like this. I had to walk like that most of the time because of the beams, because the between deck is really short. And, it's things like that. It's things like the floor, even in Nelson's cabin, which is obviously the best cabin on the ship, the floor is like that. It's not level. It goes with the roll of the ship, so it's on on a camber, and there were lots of things there that I hadn't realized. Like there was something that all the guns were chained to the middle of the deck, because obviously when you fire the cannon, it goes backwards and then forwards again. Well, if it goes too far forward, it'll fly out the side of the ship and break the ship. So they have to have a chain on the cannon to stop it falling forward too far.
Wow.
As well as a chain on the other side to stop it going back too far.
See, but that's what blows my mind is the cannons, because when you see, we've got these historic paintings behind us. That's the Victory.
Yeah.
And I'd love these paintings of the ships because it really gives you, again, like you're saying, this idea of what it was like for them.
What it's like.
So many people, it's like a village on a ship, right? When you think about it, some villages don't even have that many people that would be on the ship,
Yeah.
And when you look at it, and then you see these fights where they'll go and get their ships so close and cannon fire at each other, you're like, holy cow, you're going to go down. I mean, it's like suddenly, boom. It's just like the wars when they started marching towards each other and just shooting at each other. I was like, I'm sorry, but I think that's
crazy.
a little that's absolutely
crazy.
mental in your words.
Yes, it's crazy.
I mean, that's crazy. I wouldn't sign up for that, but that was what it was like back then.
Yeah.
Is there wasn't
They were
really
so
this.
close. As
Yeah.
you say,
Yeah.
what they used to do very often is they used to board from one ship to the other. If they got close enough,
Hijack
they
it.
would jump. They would jump from one ship to the other with swords, and they would go hand-to-hand combat.
And then if you go overboard, there could be a shark overboard. I mean,
well, that's the least of your problems.
no, I don't know, man. That's kind of freaky to me. It's like, because you're bleeding and the sharks are, all of this blood and gore is happening, and the sharks are like, oh, cool, they're having a fight. Let's go.
Yeah, not being funny. I think I'd rather die by having a shark bite me in half than die through drowning, because I don't think I'd like that very much.
Drowning is painful. That's not good.
So's a shark bite.
Yeah, but sharks are cool. But yeah, well, they are. At least we're feeding the animal planet. But the when you look at these cannons, when we go to the parks here, these historic parks, and you see how big these cannons are.
Oh,
Yeah.
And the photos you were showing, I always look at this and I go, how much work it is. I mean, I remember filming a Civil War reenactment in Yuma, Arizona, and they would set these things off. I could barely keep my camera on the tripod because I jumped and it just was so loud. I mean, it's just so loud. So you've got to think, here you are at sea.
And it's smoky.
You're on this boat, this ship. It is not a fun, it's not a cruise. It's not a pleasure cruise. It's not like, oh, can I have my cocktail now? But no, you're cramps. You have to pee overboard, since you're a guy. And here it is. Now we're going to get these giant, massive cannons. These things are huge.
Well,
I mean, I don't even, and actually having them on ship without
when you look at
sinking the ship,
when you look at the pictures, you'll see how many cannons there were on each deck.
Yeah.
And can you imagine the sheer noise and smoke and smell of those cannon going off in a battle? You know, it would have been unbelievable. I mean,
And there's,
just
I mean,
can't
there's
imagine.
goats and pigs and chickens on there.
Well, it would have been, there would have been on the passenger boats.
No, but
On the other boats, there wouldn't have been livestock normally, but just the fact that you've got like 800 men and you've got all of these cannon that are constantly, if one's not going off, the next one is, you know, because obviously they need to reload and then fire again. But the whole situation, and the most amazing thing that I found out while I was there was that the rooms where like Nelson and Hardy, their cabins, all of their walls were removable, and that would all be, if they were going to go into battle, they would disassemble all of their cabins, all of their furniture and everything would go down below decks, and the cabins had already had cannon in them. If you look at the picture of Nelson's bunk or Nelson's hammock, you'll see that there's two cannon, one either end of his bunk. That is because there were cannon ready to fire from Nelson's bedroom, basically. And that was amazing to think that every inch of the ship that could be used would be used.
And it's not like just pushing a button either.
No,
you know.
And what about like when you think they're going to go into battle for whatever reason? What about what the weather's like? Like sometimes they have really big swells and waves, and other times you don't. So I mean, how do you even shoot? That I suppose that's why they had to get so close. Is because how do you aim when the ships are doing that, you know, and the waves are doing this and
someone hijacks your boat with a sword, comes after you while you're trying to balance and shoot.
And people are jumping in over the side with swords. I mean, no wonder he had his own cannons in his bedroom.
Well, you know, it is amazing once you actually sit down and think about these things, you know, and this is what family history and history in general is all about. It's not just thinking, oh, my ancestor was at the Battle of Trafalgar, or my ancestor was in the American Civil War, or whatever. What I need to do as a family historian is to actually understand what it was like for him or her to be present at such a place as that. So now I've now learned what it was like for somebody. Well,
it's bravery. I mean, it is bravery.
I've got an idea. I've got a better idea now what it was like for somebody who served in Nelson's Navy, or for somebody who served in Henry VIII's Navy. Whereas before I actually visited those ships, yes, I knew it was a hard life and I knew it weren't easy and I knew I probably wouldn't have liked it, but I didn't really have it in my head because I hadn't been there. But now I have. I've got a completely different picture. Total respect for all of these people who did it. You know, there's no way that I'd have been running the other direction.
See, but this is the thing about going back to history and also as we're becoming such a politically correct world and our freedom of speech. I'm not saying that we should be rude or racist or anything like that. No, but I mean, it's getting to a point, you know, of when you look in the past of, there were a lot of bad things that happened in the past, obviously like slavery, right? And apartheid in South Africa, things like that. So there were bad things always, but when we look at about how our life is now, and you think about what people went through then, I mean, we do have a lot of luxury compared to what was, you know, everybody's in a different circumstance. So let me be politically correct and ungeneralize. But you see what I mean? It's like, that's why I say about being on a slave ship, being a soldier, the people that were on there really went through basically hell to accomplish whatever. Slaves were just put on there and it's like, good luck to you. And by the way, you're now certified livestock when you get to the States,
Yeah.
So I think a lot of this,
Crazy.
we've got to look at that and go, these people, over here, we just say they got bollocks. Uh-oh, I said it, Glynn. I
Oh.
said it. Oh,
No.
ooh.
Bad
But it's
girl.
true. It is true. They had chutzpah and bravery that I think we've got to kind of look at. We as human beings have to. These people stood up for something, and slaves coming through. You could just go, well, this really sucks bad. I'm just going to end it or whatever. And yet what they continued to still have hope and to congregate where they could and try and make a change where they could. I think we've got to look at that as these people who really went out on a limb, no matter, the circumstance. Today, we should be looking at that instead of being babies about things. We don't want to stand up and say I'm trying to be politically correct and it's just not happening.
Okay.
But we whine. We tend to whine as a society about things and maybe, just spout off instead of actually doing something. The spouting off and the whining and the arguments on social media, that is nothing compared to what has happened in these, when you think about what these people went through. See what I mean? So that I'm just saying there's a big difference, and there's people who do really brave
But
things today. So
they didn't, different. You're looking back, okay?
yeah,
They didn't know any different. For them, what was real was what was real right then. They didn't think into the future and like, oh, I would rather take a luxury liner than, the Victory.
No.
They didn't know.
I think that is a very important point in that when, I don't know whether you had the same sort of television programs as we do, but there have been several programs. One of them was called, for instance, The Victorian House, where they took a family and they put them in a Victorian house and they had to live like the Victorians lived.
Yeah.
Right. Now that is, on the face of it, quite a good experiment.
Yeah, it is.
But it isn't.
I like that.
But it isn't, because they haven't got the Victorian head. If I put a Victorian in a Victorian house, they would know what to do and how to do it. If you put me in a Victorian house, I don't know how to do the basics. And I think the big difference is, for a lot of us, is that we are looking back at people with our expectations rather than their expectations. And yes, it wasn't nice for the sailors because they were all cramped and they were surrounded by noise and smell, and they must have been petrified. But that was what they knew. And for us, that is an unacceptable way to live. The same as the way that for instance, my great-great-great-grandparents lived in a 1.5 bedroom house with 1.5 rooms downstairs, and there were 12 of them living in the house. That's an unacceptable way to live today. But for them, that was quite run of the mill. That was quite normal. In fact, some of them would have said
that's why we made changes. But
Yeah.
I mean, that's history, is people not liking a circumstance and changing it. That's history.
But I think what we need to do as historians is to get the full picture so we can understand more about the people who were living through that. So I now know a little bit more about the conditions on board a ship during Henry VIII's reign, and also during the 1805 at the Battle of Trafalgar, which I didn't know before. So I can have a little bit more of an idea and treat the people that I know about from them periods with a bit more respect, because I now know what they had to go through.
That's what I'm saying. It's like, it's so funny because even when I was reading your article and you talked about the food situation, there's no refrigeration. And then you're like, so you've got beer and biscuits, hard biscuits. So I go, okay, we've got ginger snap cookies and beer. That doesn't sound good. I mean, bad at first. And then you go, those cookies are not going to taste good. And that beer is that sour, warm, ew, like whatever's going off the ship.
There's going to be mold. And I know they're just going to cut off a little bit of the mold They're not going to throw
They're
it
not going to
off.
cut the mold off. Why are they going to
They're
cut the
going to
mold
eat
off?
it.
Of course you're going to eat it.
Ew.
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 Why would you cut mold off?
Oh, it's a plant species. Eat it.
It's
You'd eat
mushrooms.
everything. You got no food, so you're going to eat anything and everything.
Oh,
Wow.
wow. Dude.
It's,
But
man, this
the
is
thing-
crazy.
You see the other thing, although we think, oh, that's nice, they got beer. The only reason they had beer was that was the easiest way to take water, because if you had water, it would be rotten and it would go stagnant. If you turned it into beer, it would last longer and it would keep fresher in a way, because it was already
It was fermented.
partially worked. I mean,
Sure.
and we're talking about the early days, but my grandmother, who in the it would have been the mid-20s, 1920s, she worked for a brewing family in King's Lynn. Well, she went to work for a brewing family in King's Lynn. She was taken down to the servants' quarters on her first day, and they served her a jug of beer. And she said, "I don't drink beer." And they said, "Well, that's what the servants drink, because that's cheaper than purifying the water."
Wow.
And that is
Wow.
why they used beer. And it was a very weak beer, but it was cheaper to make beer than it was to actually purify the
Keep
water.
water. Wow.
So, that they are the sort of things that I need to understand about.
So
why
people are
drank
walking
beer.
around with a beer buzz early in the morning.
No, but it was weak.
It was
very,
weak.
very
Yeah.
weak
It wasn't,
beer.
it wasn't,
It
that's
wasn't
what I was going to say.
intended to get you
This
drunk.
wasn't a
It's
craft
intended
beer
just-
movement.
yeah.
No.
No.
It was a very weak beer, just brewed long enough to make it safe to keep. And
Wow.
that was the sort of things that they did, but again, that is the sort of things that you need to understand when you hear that they took beer on board and all they had was beer and chips, biscuits, because if not, you're going to think like you thought, oh, great. I've got some of them
Cookies
lovely
and
Jesus
beer,
hats
Santa
and-
Claus.
Yeah, and a glass of craft beer.
So
Well,
they're
that's-
all drunk, crossing the ocean, drinking beer and eating cookies.
No, it's like, here comes
Whoopee.
another guy's jumping off the other ship with a sword. You're like, hey, wait, just hold on. I need another sip of my beer.
Yeah, exactly.
Take time for a cool one.
Yeah, take time, but this is really, I mean, that's why I said the B word, because it's just, I can't even, the sheer bravery and the tenacity to go follow through on this. Because once you're out at sea. There's no saying,
Yeah.
excuse me, I'd like to go back home. That's not happening.
No.
And so the bravery of everyone, and even those, that were coming to another country for, seeking freedom, right, from
Yes.
religious, persecution.
Yep.
That's a huge bravery too.
It's crazy.
One thing before you go, I wanted to touch on with family history is, we talk a lot about family history of like the Mayflower and families coming over and
Yeah.
starting. And here we are in New England when we're talking to you. How cool is that? I mean, we're right here. We're around the corner from, as GPS says, Norwich. I'm like going, no. Glynn would say no, but
Yeah.
and this is something going back to your history too, when you discovered your relatives in Canada. These ships, the family history is tied to soldiers and military history. So looking at ship records is a way, right, to find out more about your relatives, not just the ships that were carrying passengers, but look at soldiers' records.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing what you can find out about common or garden soldiers. One of my ancestors, the one who I visited, so to speak, in Nova Scotia, in Halifax, his record tells me that he went to Halifax in Nova Scotia in 1815 because he was in the British Army, and he came back again. But it actually tells me that he was in Halifax in Nova Scotia. So he would have had to sail across the Atlantic twice.
Wow.
He went across to Canada and then he went back again to come back to England.
Wow.
Now that's amazing,
That's a long
and
trip, too.
a lot of people did that. I was amazed when I did some research about 17th century travel that there were people who were literally sometimes going backwards and forwards. They didn't just come to America and stay there. One of the men who went over with Abraham Lincoln's ancestors, he went to Hingham in Massachusetts because he came from Hingham in Norfolk. But he returned to Hingham in Norfolk. Well, I think he must have been quite mad after he's already gone over there once. You wouldn't take the journey back again unless you really had to. So
Wow.
I was amazed when I found that people were doing more than one crossing, apart from the sailors. Obviously, they are.
They were obviously tougher because they didn't know, like we know the comforts of today. So you would think I'd never do that back then, but you do it today. Yeah, you know
what they did.
But that's that's what I think the power of family history is. You start to understand too about who you are. Do you possess that same spirit, or have those traits, and you kind of have a respect that you may not have had of your ancestry when you see that. When you saw these two ships, I mean, this is so recent. Did you think about your Canadian ancestor, or the ancestor that went to Canada and back? Did you think of him while you were there on aboard the ship? I mean, that's crazy that you even could stand on the Victory. Like they would actually let you on. Not you in person, not you in particular.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
They let Glynn on board. You never know.
Yeah,
he's going to go to the bathroom.
The Victory was, contemporary to when my ancestor went across the Atlantic. It was in 1805, and he went over there about 1815. So you're only talking 10 years. So you're talking about the same sort of ship that he would have went across the Atlantic on, and it's amazing, to think that a bloke from mid Norfolk, who probably hadn't been on a ship that size ever in his life, suddenly got on this ship and was going to the unknown. And then when he was over there, he got an eye infection, so he had to come home again, and he ended up back in the same village again. And then, thankfully he did, because then I'm here. But when it's quite funny that you're talking about whether we inherit the traits of people. I obviously don't inherit his sense of adventure, because I live about 6 miles from where I grew up. So.
But you went after him. You went to Canada to look for his sparks.
So you know what we're looking back. So for them, maybe this might sound really silly, but maybe they felt that things were quite okay, that it was comfy, maybe even luxurious to them.
Yeah, I mean, they had no reason to leave, which is why they were still there.
Wow. Glynn, always a good time with you on the show. Always fascinating, and of course we all behave, don't we? We did good about toilets.
Most of us.
Don't let your mother hear this.
No, I won't.
Oh, come on, it's not that bad of a word. I'm sorry, but the bloomers were worse. Those two bloomers. I won't say it.
But then you did say politically correct. I really think that that's a phrase that should go away, because there's nothing correct about politicians or politics.
There's no such thing as politically. That's the most ironic saying ever.
I think it's meant to be sarcastic now.
Yeah, it is. I'm just tired of it. But I'm not there to be rude to people or anything like that. I'm just saying. But everyone, Glynn's website is norfolk-tours.co.uk. Again, his articles are on blendradioandtv.com, as well as nationalparktraveling.com. Glynn is on the show every 4th Saturday. So keep up with us at bigblendradio.com. Thank you, Glynn, and thanks for putting up with us.
Yes.
Yeah, lovely to chat to you as usual.
Thank you. That's